right, now that we've created most of our endpoints for the orders namespace as well as the auth namespace, we're going to go ahead and create our database that's going to help us to store our records of users and those of orders. So we're going to use SQLAlchemy, which is an object relational mapper that will help us to be able to keep track of our database by creating classes which will define the tables of our database. It's also going to help us to access our database rows as objects, which we shall call some methods on so as to manipulate our data. So let's go ahead and install SQLAlchemy. So I'm going to head over to my terminal, and within my terminal, I'm going to stop our server. And what I'm going to do is to install Flask SQLAlchemy. So I'm going to say pip install Flask SQLAlchemy. So this is going to go ahead and install Flask SQLAlchemy within our project. After installing SQLAlchemy, we shall basically freeze it within our requirements.txt file so that we can be able to keep track of it. So I'll use Ctrl and R to insert the freeze command just like I wrote it here. And I'm going to go ahead and basically go ahead and freeze it to my requirements.txt. So right after doing that, then the next thing we're going to do is to create our SQLAlchemy instance. So Flask SQLAlchemy is an ORM, or what we call an object relational mapper, that allows us to work with our database tables as classes. So we're going to write these classes and then define special methods on them that will help us to create, read, and update our database records. So I'm going to go ahead and go to our code. So within our code, I'm going to go to our folder, which is our API folder. And what I'll do is to create a utilities folder. So I'm going to create a new folder. So I'm going to create this folder and call it utilities. Now within utilities, I also create an init.py file. So I'm going to first close some of this. So I'm going to focus on the utilities folder. I'll create an init.py file. So I'm going to just say init.py. And then within init.py, I will create a DB instance. So SQLAlchemy provides us with a class called the SQLAlchemy class that's going to help us to use the SQLAlchemy features. So we are using the ORM in this case. We're not actually making use of the SQL toolkit. So what I'm going to do is to go ahead and import the class. So I'll say from Flask SQLAlchemy. So I'll say from Flask SQLAlchemy. I'm going to go ahead and import the SQLAlchemy class. So after importing our SQLAlchemy class, then the next thing I'm going to do is to go ahead and create an instance of our SQLAlchemy class. So I'm going to say DB. So this is going to be DB. And our instance is going to be called DB. So I'll say this is equal to SQLAlchemy. So right after creating this, then I'm also going to go ahead and create our database models that are going to define our tables in the database. So we're going to have two tables which are going to be related to each other. We're going to deal with relational databases. So we're going to be able to have tables that are related to each other. So when you go right here, I'm going to go to diagrams.net. This is what I used to actually try to sketch out the schema for our application model. So we have two tables. We have the user table and the order table. So when you observe the user table, we see that you have fields such as the username, the email, the password. You can also add some fields like the staff. So I'm going to go ahead and add this. So I'm going to basically add this. I'm going to copy and paste. Actually, I'll just copy one field. So just to add it to the table. So I'll call this staff, just to specify if a user is a staff or not. So I'll say this is going to be a boolean. So we're also going to have another boolean that's going to specify whether this user is active. So I'm just going to Control C, copy it, and Control V to paste it. So just go to this field, basically Control C, Control V. So I'm going to just call this is active. It's also going to be a boolean. So that defines our user table. Now, in our user table, we have these various fields. We also have the ID, which is going to be our primary key for this table. So it's going to act as a unique identifier for every row within our table. So you have the order table that has the ID, the size of the pizza, the order status. So just like I said, our orders are going to have a status of whether they are in transit, whether they are delivered, or whether they are pending. So we're going to also have a quantity, which is going to specify how many units of a pizza we're going to actually get. You have the price and you have the flavor. So you have the user ID, which is going to be a foreign key to our table user. So this foreign key is going to be the primary key of that specific user who made that specific order, which means that every user is going to be able to place or create an order. So right now, if we are to see down here, we have lists of choices. So right here, I have our order choices. Actually, these are going to be our order status. Let me change this. Let me change this to order status. And then here we're going to have our sizes. So we're going to have the small, medium, large, and extra large. So we're going to go ahead and implement these as choices. So our order status choices are going to be pending, in transit, and delivered. And we are going to put them on our order status field. So we're going to look into how we can actually be able to implement choice fields within Flask SQLAlchemy. So we also have our sizes, which are going to put onto our size field on our order table. So we're going to go ahead and also implement that. So one thing I'm going to do is to head over to our code and then start modeling this out. So I'm going to go to our code, and the first thing I'll do is to basically go ahead and create our models mod package. So I'm going to create a package which I'm going to call models. So this is where our database tables are going to be located for both our users as well as our orders. So we need to create an ini.py file to basically make it a package. So this is going to be danda ini.py, and then I'll go ahead and write a new file. So this new file is going to be our users file. So this is where I'm going to write the model for our users table. And I'm also going to go ahead and create the file for the orders table. So this is going to be orders.py, and then this is going to be the orders table where we're going to actually write the orders table. Now that we've created this, we're going to go ahead and follow our diagram to guide us into creating these various tables. So the first table we're going to create is one for the users. So I'm going to go to our users model file, and then what I'll do is to first import our DB instance. Remember that we created our DB instance within our utilities folder right here. So I actually wrote it within our ini.py, meaning that we're just going to inherit to actually import it from utils. So what I'll do is to come to models and then within users. So what I'll say is from dot. So since it's outside the current folder, we're going to say dot, and then we go to utilities. And then within our utilities, we are simply going to import our DB instance. Right after importing our DB instance, then we're going to go ahead and basically create our database table. So I'm going to create a class. So this is going to be our SQLAlchemy, Flask SQLAlchemy table that's going to define how our user table is going to be. So this is going to be our user table, and it's going to inherit from db.model, meaning that it's going to be database model. So we're going to define the table name. So the first thing we're going to define is going to be the table name, which is the name of the table. So by default, the name of the table is always the name of the model, but in lowercase. But in this case, we can specify the table. So we're going to say danda table name, and this is going to be equal to. So we're going to basically put in here, and this is going to be users. So I'm going to call this table users, and then I'll go ahead and specify an ID. So we're going to specify our ID. So our ID is going to be equal to db.column. So it's going to be a column, and specify the type. The type is going to be integer, and then since this is going to be our primary key, so it's going to specify that primary key is going to be equal to true. So this basically means that our this column is going to be our primary key. Right after doing this, then I'm going to add the other fields such as the username, the email, the password. So I'll just come right in here, and what I'll do is to say that we're going to have our username, and this is going to be db column. So it's going to be db dot. So this is going to be a string. So we can even mention the length of that specific string, the max length. So in this case, let's say our username, the max username is going to be 5, and then you can say null equals false. So right after doing this, then the next thing is going to be to actually create our email field. So we want an email that's unique. So what we're going to do is to say that our email is going to be db dot column, and this is going to be db dot string. Now we want the longest email to be 50 characters long, and then we want to say that this is not going to be null, so we shall add a nullable constraint on it. So we're going to say nullable is going to be false. So this is going to be nullable equals false, And then after specifying this, then we shall also add a unique constraint. So we're going to say unique. Actually, let me maximize it so that you guys can see it. So this is going to be unique equals to true. So right after doing this, then we're going to also add our password field. So I'm going to say password, and password is going to be db dot colon. Actually, let me call this password hash. So I'm actually going to call this password hash, and it's going to be db dot colon db dot. I'm going to just call it text, and then I'll just say that this is not going to be null. So I'm going to say null. It's going to be equal to false. And right after doing this, then I'm going to specify the remaining field. So that is that dot is active, and then that dot is staff. So I'm going to say is staff, and then staff is going to be db. So this is going to be equal to db dot colon, and then this will be db dot boolean, and then we shall specify that in this case what we're going to have is our default. So our default is going to be false. So not every user is going to be a staff user. So just modeling this out. And then we're also going to add the is active. So this is going to be is active, which is also going to have the same value. So I'll basically copy this and paste it right here. So right now we are done creating our user table. The next thing is going to be to create a special function or method that's going to help us to return string representations of these objects. So the way to do that is by creating an pre method. So it's going to be pre. This is going to take itself, then it's going to return an f string containing object. So we write an f string. So right here, I'm going to say user, and we shall specify the username of that specific user. Actually, let's also make our username unique. So I'll say our username also has a unique constraint. So I'll say equals true. So right after doing this, then I'm going to just come right here. And what I'll do is to say self dot. In this case, we want to actually return the username of that specific user. Then after doing this, then hoping that everything is fine, we are going to go ahead and create the orders table. So I'll head over to the order models, and then what I'll do is to basically import our DB instance. So I'll say from dot details, we are going to import our DB instance. And then after that, I'm going to create our class order, which is going to inherit from DB dot model. Actually, it's going to inherit from DB dot model. And then I'll do the same thing. I'll first specify the table name, so I'll write down the name. And then this is going to be going to just call it orders. And then we're also going to write the ID, so I'll basically copy this since it's going to be the same thing. So I'm just going to come right here and I'll add our ID field. And this is going to be an integer, which is going to be our primary key as well. So the first field I'm going to specify is going to be the order size. So our size is going to be a string. So it's going to be a string, but it's going to be of choice. So we're going to look into how to implement a choice field with Flask SQLAlchemy. So we're going to use enums to implement this. So what I'm going to do is to create an enum class that's going to have our choices. Then we're going to actually access those choices from the enum class. So what I'll do is to come at the top of our code. I'll do is to say from enum import our enum. And right after doing this, then what I'm going to do is to create our class for our pizza sizes. So I'll just say size. Then actually I'm going to call it sizes. What I'll do is to specify the different sizes. So we're going to have the sizes as small, medium, large, and extra large. So I'll come and specify this first size as small. We'll have a value of small, and then we're going to have medium. That's also going to have a size of medium, and then we're also going to have large, which is going to have a size of large. So this is going to be large, so we're going to have large here, and then we're going to have extra large. So I'll basically specify that this is going to be extra large. So this will have extra large as the value. So right after doing this, then the next thing we're going to do is to be able to create a field that's going to actually use this as our choices. So to do this, what I'm going to come and do is to come right here and basically say size is going to be equal to db dot. So we're going to specify this is going to be db.colon, and then we shall specify the type as the SQLAlchemy type for enum. So we shall say db.enum, and then right here we shall pass in our enum class, which is our sizes. And right after doing that, we can also say nullable. Actually, since we're going to have a default, so the default size is actually what we shall specify. So we shall specify a default size as sizes dot. So we shall specify our sizes small as our default value for this specific field. Now we're going to also implement the order status. So we're going to come here and we're going to create the order status field. So I'm just going to do the same thing. So I'll say order status. Our order status is going to be a column, so we're going to say db.column, and then this is going to be db.enum, and then we're going to specify which class is going to have that specific enum. So I'm going to come right here, and what I'll do is to say class, and here I'll say order status, and what I'll do here is specify the different statuses. So I'll say pending, it's going to be equal to pending, and right here I'll also come and say in transit. So we have in transit, and this is going to be in transit. So we're going to have in transit, and then we're going to have in this case we're also going to have delivered. So in case that pizza has been delivered, then we're going to have the status as delivered. So this is going to be delivered. So right after doing this, then the next thing is going to be to specify that this is going to actually be an enum of type order status. So you're going to actually add order status. Now we're going to also specify the default. So I'm going to say default is going to be equal to order status is, in this case we shall say pending. So right after doing this, then the next field is going to actually be flavor. So I'm going to add the flavor. In this case, our flavor is going to be flavor. So our flavor is going to be db dot column, and then we're going to have db dot string. So this is going to be simple. Then we can say nullable. So this is going to be nullable because false, meaning that we're going to have our flavor. So we're going to have our flavor as not now. Now, which other field are remaining? Now, I'm also thinking of adding date time fields onto these tables. So I'm actually going to add a date created field so that the date at which you created this order. Actually, let me include it here. So I'm going to Control C, Control V, and add it as another attribute. So I'll say date created. So this is the date to which you created the order, and then this is going to be date time, and then I'll also come right here and also add the date at which the user account was created. So I'll Ctrl C and Ctrl V, and then add it as an extra field. So I'll just come right here and say date created. So right here, what I'm going to do is also specify that this is going to be a datetime object, and now I'm going to go ahead and add this. So I'm going to head over to our code. So I'll say date created is going to be equal to db dot column. So this is going to be a db dot column, and then I'll specify this is going to be a db dot date time object, and then I'll come and say that we need a default. So our default, so I'm going to use the time to generate that default, the object that's going to specify the time at which you create that order. So I'm going to come right here, and what I'll do is to import date time. So I'll say from date time, we are going to import our date time. So right after importing our date time, I'll come right here and I say that the default date time is going to be date time dot UTC. Now, so this means that every time you create an order, the time at which you created that order is going to be tracked. So right after doing that, then we're going to also create the is stuff and is. Actually, we don't need those because this is going to be our order table. So the remaining thing is to actually establish relationships between these tables. Now the beauty with SQLAlchemy is we establish these as relationships. So I'll go to the user table within our users.imodel file. Actually, before I do that, let me first create our dictionary method on our order table. So it's going to take in self and then I'm just going to come and return. So I return an F string, and this F string is going to contain our order. So we're going to have an order, and then this order is going to be having self. So yes, we shall just track self dot the ID of the order. So I'm going to head over and save. And after saving this, the next thing is going to be to actually go ahead and create a relationship between these two tables. So within our users table, what I'll do is to go to our users table. Our ID is going to be a foreign key to our order table. So let's go ahead and specify this. So just like you see here, our diagram is showing that we shall have the field for user ID on our order field. So what I'm going to do is to establish a relationship. So I'm going to create a field on our table, and this field is going to be the user, or we're going to actually say that this is going to be, actually let's call it my user, and then what we shall do is to say that this is going to be a db dot column, and then we shall specify that this is going to be an integer. So this is going to be an integer, and this will be a foreign key to the user table that you created. So we're going to have it being a foreign key, so I'll say it's going to be db foreign key to our user table. So in this case, we're going to specify the user table that you created. So since we specified it as users, then we shall actually write users dot id, meaning the id of the field that you created on our user table. So what I'll do is to also establish the same relationship this side, so that you can actually link the two tables. So I'll come to our user table right here, and what I'll do is to specify a relationship. So in this case, I'm going to say that orders. So this is basically going to allow us to access the user's orders via user.order. So just like we're going to see. So I'm going to actually come and say orders is going to be equal to db relationship. So this is going to be our relationship. And then we have to specify the model as a string. So this is going to be a model as a string. So our model is going to be our order model. And then we're going to say that the backref. So we're going to specify a backref, and the backref is going to explain how we are going to access a user from an order. For example, order.customer. So we're going to actually create that backref as, so we're going to call it a customer, and then we're going to specify that lazy equals true. So right after doing this, I'm going to save, and now we have our database tables created. Now the next thing is going to be to enable our Flask to be able to create these tables in our database. So what I'm going to do is to come right in here, and what I'm going to do is to actually use Flask Migrate to generate these tables. So Flask Migrate is a very important tool that allows us to create migrations for our Flask SQLAlchemy tables. It relies on Alembic, which is a tool that helps us to do migrations with Flask SQL, with SQLAlchemy. So what I'm going to do is to install Flask Migrate. So I'll come right in our terminal. So the first thing I'll do is install Flask Migrate. So I'll say pip install and Flask Migrate. So right after installing Flask Migrate, then the next thing is going to be to basically hook it into our application and make it work with SQLAlchemy. So Flask Migrate helps us to keep track of our migrations, which are just changes that we do in our database. And the beauty is it can allow us to create these changes without having to actually delete our database tables. So right after installing Flask Migrate, I'll basically also add it to our requirements, so txt file. So I'm just doing the search for the previous command, just like you saw with Control R. So right after doing that, then I'm going to head over to our init.py file within our main API project. So I'll close some of these editors, and right after closing some of these editors, then I'll open our init.py file, and then actually the init.py file within our main application. So I'll just come within init.py. The first thing I'm going to do is to import our DB instance. So I'll come right here, I'll say run. In this case, it's going to be utils. I'm going to import our DB instance. And then after importing our DB instance, then I'm also going to go ahead and import our database model. So I'll say from dot, in this case, it's going to be models. I'm going to go ahead and import, actually, this is going to be from dot models dot orders. I'm going to import our order model. So I'll say import order. And then I'll go ahead and also import our So I'll say from .models dot, in this case it's going to be users. So I'll go ahead and import our user model. So right after importing this, then the next thing is going to be to actually create these in our database. But before we do that, what I'm going to do is to actually specify the configurations for our database, something I had actually forgotten. But before that, let me first set up our Flask SQLAlchemy. So I'll say from Flask SQLAlchemy. So it's going to be alchemy. I'm going to go ahead and import the SQLAlchemy class. So I'll actually go ahead and import. We've already imported that DB instance here, so I'm just going to come and basically hook it onto our application with DB. So this is going to actually be DB dot init. It's going to be init app. It's going to take in our app instance, and mind that I'm adding the DB instance after configuring our app to run with our configurations. Otherwise, it's going to give you errors because it will look for the configurations and they won't be there. So I'm also going to hook up Flask Migrate. So I'll say from Flask. So it's going to be from Flask Migrate. I'm going to import our Migrate class. And then our Migrate class is also going to be hooked onto our main app. So I'll just come right here. What I'll do is to say that I'm going to come here and say that Migrate is going to be equal to Migrate, and then I'll specify the first thing is going to be our app instance as well as our DB instance. So hoping that everything is fine. Now let's go to our configurations and configure the database that we're actually going to use. So I'm going to go to our config folder, and then within our config folder, I'm going to go to the config module, and then within our dev config is where we're going to actually specify our database URI. So SQLAlchemy works in a way that it accepts a URL string or a connection string that basically shows where the database is going to be. So in this case, we're going to use SQLite for development. Feel free to use Postgres or any other database. I'm going to use SQLite. So the first thing I'm going to do is to actually specify some configuration specific to SQLAlchemy. So I'm going to first specify within here. So I'm going to add a setting, which is going to be SQLAlchemy. So this is actually going to be track modifications. So this is going to be track modifications. And then we're going to set this to false so that we don't track any modifications. And then another thing I'm going to specify, now this is going to be in our development. We're going to specify our SQLAlchemy echo. So we're going to specify SQLAlchemy echo. And this is going to be true because we want to check the SQL statements that are generated on every transaction we do. So right after doing this, then we want to also go ahead and state our SQLAlchemy database URI. Now let me simplify things for you and enlarge so that you guys can see well. Now another thing I'm going to do is to go ahead and basically, so what I'm going to do is to go ahead and set up a connection string. So the first thing we're going to do is to specify that we want our database to be created within our API folder. So to keep track of where we are, we're going to use the Danda file variable, which is going to stand for the file in which we're editing, which is our config.py. And we're going to use that to be able to dictate where we want our database to be created. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'll come right here. I'll create that file. So say base that actually that our SQLite database will be created in the same as the config folder, just like you're going to see. I'm going to say base dar. This is going to be using OS, so I'm going to say OS path dot dar name. So this is actually going to be the directory name, which is the config folder, and then we shall keep track of where the specific file is. So I'm going to say OS path dot real path, and then we're going to specify that this is going to be the path to our file. Now after doing this, then the next thing I'm going to do is to basically create our connection string. So the way we create our connection string is by specifying, so I'm just going to come to our dev config and then say SQLAlchemy. So this is going to be SQLAlchemy database URI, and this is going to be equal to, so the first thing you specify is the database. In this case, we're going to use SQLite, and then we're also going to add concatenation. So this is going to be concatenation So we're going to add the base dar. So we're going to use OS to join the base dar to the name of the database we want to create. So I'm going to say OS dot path dot join. So we're going to join the base dar and then the name of the database we want to use, which is going to be, so this is going to actually be our, so I'm going to call it db dot SQLite3. Going to call it db.sqlite3. So right after doing this, we are going to go ahead and create our database. So to create our database, I'm going to create a context within our shell that's going to allow us to access our database modules as well as to access our DB instance so that we can easily go ahead and create our database. So I'm going to go to our init.py and I'm going to add the following line. So I'll go right here after adding our namespaces. So I'll say app dot make shell. So this is going to be make shell context, and then this is going to actually help us to create a context within the shell from which you can access our models as well as our DB instance. So I'm going to say dep, then this is going to be this is going to be at app.shell context processor. Forgive me. So this is going to be our context. So it's going to be context processor. So we're going to define a function called the make shell context. And then this function is going to be one that's going to return a dictionary containing the different variables. So we're going to return, in this case, we're going to return our DB. So in this case, we're going to say DB, which is going to stand for our database instance. And then we're also going to have, in this case, we're going to have user. So this is going to be our user. And then we're going to also specify our order table, which is actually going to be our table. So right after doing this, then the rest of the work is going to be from our terminal. So let's do that. So I'm going to head over to my terminal right here. So hoping that you still have a Flask app environment variable set to our API project. So I'll come and say echo. So this is going to be the Flask app environment variable, and it's still our API folder. So I'll just run Flask shell. That's going to allow us to actually open a Python shell within our project so that you can actually go ahead and play around with our Flask app. So I'm just going to come and say Flask shell, and this is going to go ahead and open our Flask shell. So it seems like we have an error. So we have an object of type has no attribute len. So it seems like we made an error right here. So this is actually in our enums. So let's check for where this error is. So what I'm going to do is to go back. So actually we didn't specify this as enums. Sorry for that. So I'll basically add this and specify that they are enums. So our size is an enum as well as our order status. So these are going to be enums. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Actually, it's going to be enum. Sorry for that mistake. So after saving this, then the next thing is going to be going back to our database. So when I go back to our database right here, I'm going to say Flask shell. I hope you don't have any errors. Our Flask shell has been created. So right in our Flask shell, we can access our DB instance, which is going to show us the path to our database, which is our db.sqlite3. We're also going to access our user model, which is our API models user. We're also going to access our order, which is going to be our order. So when I say order, we can actually go ahead and also access our order. So creating our database is going to be as simple as saying db.create. So I'll say db.create all. And this is going to go ahead and create our database tables, just like you can see here. So now this is going to show the various SQL statements generated. For example, our ID, which is an integer, our username, our email, our password. Now you also observe that you have our unique constraints here. We have our primary key as our ID. Now we have a relationship here because you have the various fields for that orders, and we have our user, which we have a foreign key to our user table which references the user ID. So this has successfully created our database table.